What's up, Commanders fans? Welcome back to Commanders HQ, where we bring you the most complete coverage of everything happening with the Burgundy and Gold. This team is working harder than ever, sharpening every detail and fine-tuning their game so that when the lights come on this fall, they'll be ready to deliver big results for all of us. Before we dive into today's exclusive story, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button. It really helps us grow this community of passionate Washington fans and gets our content in front of more eyes. And trust me, today's news is one you're going to want to stick around for because it touches on two huge storylines: Debo Samuel's fantasy football outlook in 2025 and the developing situation with Brian Robinson Jr. potentially being on the move. Let's break it all down. Now, let's start with Debo Samuel, because ever since he landed in Washington, he's been one of the most talked about players at camp. Fans are already excited to see him in Burgundy and Gold, and you can feel the chemistry building between him and quarterback Jayden Daniels. With Terry McLaurin sitting out for a new contract, Debo has naturally stepped into a leadership role on the field. The connection between him and Daniels? It's undeniable. But here's where things get tricky when you shift from real-life impact to fantasy football expectations. NFL.com's fantasy analyst Marcus Grant isn't exactly jumping on the Debo hype train. He's telling fantasy managers to slow down and think twice before drafting Samuel as anything higher than a WR3 or flex option this year. And you know what? He's not entirely wrong. Let's be honest, Debo's career has been a roller coaster for fantasy purposes. Outside of that electric 2021 season where he nearly hit 2,000 total yards and scored 14 touchdowns, he's been inconsistent. Just look at last year. 806 yards, 4 scores. Those aren't WR1 numbers, even though we all know Debo makes highlight reel plays every other week. So what does this mean for you on draft day? The safe play is this. Don't take Debo as your WR1 or WR2. Instead, think of him as the ultimate wild card in your flex spot. He's the kind of player who might give you a quiet game one week, but then explode for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns the next. That's the magic of Debo. Unpredictable, but dangerous. Here's the exciting part, though. While fantasy analysts are pumping the brakes, the practice reports coming out of Ashburn tell a different story. Without Terry McLaurin in the mix, Jayden Daniels has leaned heavily on Debo, and the results have been glowing. Observers at camp describe the duo as cooking during 11-on-11 drills. Debo looks aggressive, fast, and hungry to prove himself in this new system. Add in Cliff Kingsbury's creativity as offensive coordinator, and suddenly you can't help but wonder, could Debo finally find that fantasy consistency in Washington? Marcus Grant himself admitted that if Kingsbury dials up the right plays, Samuel could rewrite the narrative and become a draft day steal. So here's the bottom line. Debo may not be the safest pick, but he's absolutely worth the gamble if you land him in the middle rounds. He's a player who can swing your fantasy week, and at the same time, he's a real-life spark plug who's already helping shape Washington's offense. Now let's pivot to the second half of today's story, one that might sting a little for Commanders fans. Reports indicate that Brian Robinson Jr. is being shopped by the front office. Yes, you heard that right. The former third-round pick out of Alabama, once seen as a potential long-term starter, may have played his final snaps for Washington. The truth is, the coaching staff and front office no longer view Robinson as a fit for what they're building. With his contract set to expire next spring, GM Adam Peters is looking to move him now rather than risk losing him for nothing. And the timing might actually work in Washington's favor. The Miami Dolphins are reportedly desperate for help at running back. Devon Achane is already banged up, rookie Jalen Wright just went down with a scary injury at practice, and that leaves Miami relying on rookie Ollie Gordon II and journeyman Mike Boone. That's not exactly a formula for competing in a tough AFC East. So naturally, Robinson's name has been floated as a potential solution. He's a physical runner, proven in between the tackles, and he could easily complement Miami's speed-oriented backfield. For the Commanders, moving Robinson would clear cap space and free up a roster spot for younger backs who might be a better fit in Kingsbury's scheme. For Miami, it could be a low-cost, high-reward move that stabilizes their ground game.
Of course, other teams are also sniffing around for running back help before the season, which only strengthens Washington's bargaining position. The big question is, what's Robinson worth right now? Maybe a mid to late round pick? Maybe a player-for-player swap? Either way, it feels like this is heading toward a resolution before roster cuts hit. Of course, when you talk about the 2024 draft class, the spotlight immediately goes to Jayden Daniels. Washington found their franchise quarterback, the guy who's not only brought stability under center, but is already generating real hope for the future. He's the centerpiece. You also look at Mike Seinerstill, who turned heads as a rookie cornerback last year. His toughness, versatility, and ability to step up in big moments made him one of the pleasant surprises of the 2024 campaign. Fans are expecting even bigger things in year two. But here's the issue. While Daniels and Seinerstill have already shown they belong, other members of that same class are starting to raise some real concerns. Particularly tight end Ben Sinnott and wide receiver Luke McCaffrey, both drafted on day 2. Their development is becoming one of the biggest question marks of this preseason. Let's start with Sinnott. Drafted out of Kansas State in the second round, the hope was that he could develop into a long-term weapon at tight end. Washington invested a valuable pick in him, and the vision was clear. Pair a young, athletic tight end with a young quarterback to grow together. So far, though, the results haven't matched the expectations. He's still sitting behind veteran Zach Ertz on the depth chart. And while Ertz hasn't suited up during the preseason, giving Sinnott valuable snaps, his production has been minimal. Against the Bengals, no catches at all. For a second-round pick, that's concerning. Fans don't expect instant stardom from every rookie, but by year 2, you want to start seeing flashes. Sinnott has the tools, but right now, it feels like he's struggling to put it all together. And then there's Luke McCaffrey. Taken in the third round, Luke was always going to be a project. Remember, he transitioned to wide receiver late in his college career after spending years as a quarterback. That's a tough learning curve for any player. This offseason seemed like his perfect opportunity. With Terry McLaurin holding out during camp, the door was wide open for depth receivers to step up. McCaffrey had flashes in practice, but once the lights came on in the preseason, the production just wasn't there.
So far, he is just one catch for -1 yard. Against the Bengals, he wasn't even targeted. Meanwhile, other receivers like rookie Jalen Lane and undrafted free agents Tay Martin and Ja'Cory Brooks have all made more of an impression. That's not the type of competition you want to be losing if you're a third-round pick. Here's why this matters so much. Draft picks are the foundation of any rebuilding franchise. Washington can't afford to miss on too many, especially when you're talking about day 2 picks, selections that are supposed to provide starting-level talent or high-impact contributors. Right now, it feels like the Commanders have hit big with Daniels and Sainristil, but Sinnott and McCaffrey are falling behind. If they don't start showing progress soon, the team could be forced to make tough roster decisions. And let's be real, this roster is more competitive than it's been in years. Dan Quinn and Adam Peters have filled it with veterans, with young talent, with hungry players fighting for spots. That means there's less room to wait on maybe guys. If Sinnott and McCaffrey don't figure it out, someone else will be ready to take their place. Now, we also have to be fair here. Development isn't linear. Not every player explodes in year 1. For McCaffrey especially, the transition from quarterback to wide receiver takes time. He's raw, but he's also athletic, intelligent, and comes from a football family. It wouldn't shock anyone if he put it together later this season. For Sinnott, sometimes it takes tight ends a couple of years to adjust to the speed and physicality of the NFL. But while patience is important, so is urgency. The Commanders are building around a young quarterback, and the supporting cast around him needs to step up now, not 3 years from now. The 2025 season is about more than just wins and losses. It's about shaping the foundation of the Jayden Daniels era. Every draft pick matters. Every roster spot matters. And that's why this concern around Sinnott and McCaffrey feels so significant. If they don't start producing, they could find themselves on the chopping block. That's not hyperbole. That's reality in today's NFL. The Commanders are no longer in a place where underperforming draft picks automatically get multiple years to develop. The bar has been raised.
So here's where we stand. On one hand, you've got Debo Samuel, who's quickly becoming a fan favorite and the heartbeat of this new look offense, even if fantasy analysts are skeptical about his consistency. On the other hand, you've got Brian Robinson Jr., a hard-nosed runner who might be on his way out as Washington reshapes its offensive identity. Two very different stories, but both highlight one thing. The Commanders are evolving. They're building a new core around Jaden Daniels and Debo Samuel and Terry McLaurin once his contract is settled, while Adam Peters isn't afraid to make tough decisions to position this team for long-term success. And as much as we all love players like Robinson, sometimes moving on is what's best for both sides. So, Commanders fans, now it's your turn. What do you think about Debo Samuel's outlook in 2025? Is he worth the gamble in fantasy football as a WR2, or would you rather wait and grab him later as a flex wildcard? And what about Brian Robinson Jr.? Do you agree with the front office possibly moving on from him, or do you think he still has value here in Washington? Drop your answers in the comments. I'll be checking them out and replying to as many as I can. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this breakdown, hit that like button and subscribe to Commanders HQ. We're going to be here all season long, bringing you exclusive news, insider analysis, and everything you need to follow the Burgundy and Gold. The future is taking shape in Washington, and you don't want to miss a moment of it.